Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national broadcaster, Doordarshan, about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and key trends and developments around the world that have an impact on India's rise. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking a close look at the phenomenon of economic warfare that is becoming rampant and widespread worldwide. There is a tendency towards economic nationalism, economic aggression, economic coercion, and economic conflict that is raging indiscriminately. So, what are the roots of this malaise, and which way is the world headed, the global economy? And what are the points of recourse for a country like India that's often at the receiving end of this economic warfare? How can it defend its interests, and how can it continue to grow and rise economically? That is the theme of the show. And to discuss this, I have with me a very well-regarded thinker, writer, analyst, Akshay Mathur. Akshay Mathur is a senior director at the Asia Society Policy Institute, think tank, and is based here in New Delhi and has been focused on the geo-economic scene for a long time. Akshay, it's great to have you.
Thank you very much for having me, Sreeram.
Akshay, I've already stated the problem. Our Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that this is an era of uncertainties. And the economic environment especially is highly uncertain and full of shocks and twists that were unexpected. And then secondly, I want to also bring in our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, who's been saying that everything is being weaponized today. So how did we come to this point where economic conflict seems to be overriding economic cooperation? I mean, there was this whole post-Cold War period after 1990s when, in the heydays of globalization, when people said free movement of goods, free movement of capital, ideas, borderless world, it's all becoming one big village and we'll all live happily together. And now everybody is at, every other person's throat and, they're demanding concessions, issuing threats. And economic force, economic instruments are being used to try and apply pressure on other countries. So what happened to that liberal order, and what kind of order is this? I mean, I'm even calling it disorder. Your thoughts on this, extreme geo-economic flux that we are seeing?
Discontent of globalization was always there, and it was simmering for a long time, as you know. And the challenge that we've had for a long time is how we manage those discontents, especially those who had gotten left out of globalization. So it was always simmering. What has really happened in the last decade or so, amplified by COVID, is this rise of economic security. And that, economic security has now become, has taken primacy in economic diplomacy and foreign policy generally. So what's happened is during COVID, we realized that, during the pandemic, that our supply chains were so interdependent on a few nations. And that's how economic security became so predominant. There has been one more change in the last 1 year alone, and which is with President Trump now coming in during his second term. That has changed how global economic governance works. The United States is a large economy. It's $30 trillion plus economy. So any change in its approach towards the world has a significant, perhaps an amplified change in global economy. And so what we are now noticing, you did mention that, do we have a different kind of order? There are certain characteristics of this new order, for instance. So the one, I would say 2 or 3, which I wanted to highlight. One is that the influence of state has become more important. Of course, we always associated that with China and some of the non-market economies. But even President Trump has now reinforced the idea that the government has to take more interest in foreign policy and international relations. If you look at the decisions that the President Trump has taken after taking over the second term in his presidency, when it came to Panama ports, when it has taken what it wants to do with Europe, the wars, it's clear that the state is taking more interest. A second one has to do more with, I'd say that the way we are now grappling with global economic governance. We really don't know whether G20 is an effective forum, whether it's WTO, whether it is the IMF, whether we need a new set of institutions, formal or informal. And so I would say that this disillusionment with global governance, the rise of economic security, the influence of state in securing supply chains and trade, better terms of trade, these are all indications of the new kind of order that you're talking about. Sure, I would not say disorder, but there are certainly new characteristics of this new economic order.
Yeah, and like you said, more involvement of state, meaning also more politics, more politicization of economic processes, isn't it?
Absolutely right. More politicization. In some ways, political leaders taking a direct interest in global economy is not a bad thing. In fact, if you remember, when G20 was escalated into the leaders level in 2009, from the finance ministers level, the idea was for political leaders to take a more direct view of the political economy. But now, of course, we're not just seeing it in global economic governance, but the use of financial instruments.
Yeah.
And you might recall that there have been debates on whether this new order should be, whether tariffs should be used as a weapon or not. Should sanctions be used as a weapon or not? Should we seek investments coercively or not? These are all now characteristics of this new form of economic.
Absolutely. Let's go to those. I mean, you mentioned sanctions. I mean, the latest US sanctions on Russia, on Russian oil, and also the removal of the waiver for the previous sanctions on Iran for the Chabahar port. Both these impact India directly, and there's been a lot of consternation in India about sanctions. And generally, our position has been we don't go along with unilateral sanctions of any country. We only go along if there's a United Nations, like a multilateral sanctions regime. But whether we go along or not, the point is we are impacted. And so what does a country like India, that wants to have autonomy and freedom in its choices, we'll deal with whoever we want. But then on the other hand, there's pressure to conform, right? Especially through sanctions on, Iranian oil or Russian oil for that matter. So where does this, the sanctions, the data shows that resort to sanctions has increased. I mean, I was seeing something like since 2001, there's been a 9 to 10-fold increase in the usage of sanctions as a coercive instrument. So, and at any given time, approximately 20-25% of the countries of the world are under some form of either primary or secondary sanctions. So, in this kind of environment, how do we hold our own, as a country that wants to maximize the gains from the global economy, but is at many times being pushed back in terms of our freedom of choices?
Sanctions, I think, are here to stay, because one of the arguments that is always made in favor of sanctions is that you either do nothing or go to war. So sanctions is the only middle path, and there is a range of things that you can do with sanctions. It is also true that sanctions have been, there have been mixed results, when it comes to the efficacy of the sanctions. So, for instance, if you look at the sanctions that were imposed on Russia and on Iran, it did impact India also. And so, we were not able to make our payments to Russia or to Iran for fear of sanctions. Indian businesses had to be a lot more careful in dealing with countries that had whether multilateral or unilateral sanctions by the UN, by the US, or even by Europe, by the European Union. So, to some extent, they have teeth, and there is severe implications of sanctions. On the other hand, sanctions may not work. So, for instance, in the Russian oil price cap system that the G7 and the European leaders have imposed, I think there's been mixed results. Initially, they were somewhat successful in bringing the price cap to below $60 per barrel. But then oil dropped below $60 per barrel. So then they had to reconfigure the sanctions to make sure that it is pegged to the price of oil and price of Brent.
Wow.
So sanctions have to be reconfigured. And by the way, sanctions these days are also being used as a more generic term to also include foreign investment screening, for instance. We don't normally include foreign investment screening, but I think we should. So foreign investment screening is really key. More than 50 countries in the world have introduced laws and measures on foreign investment screening. How do we take in foreign investment, as well as where should our foreign investment go? So United States, Europe, so many countries in the world are now keenly monitoring what to do and which money to take and how the foreign investment should come, particularly in critical sectors. Also outward investment. Where should the money go to? Which sector should the investments go into? So I think broadly, the sanctions are here to stay. Yes, of course, the 18th and the 19th package that the European Union has announced in 2025 names Nayara Energy in India as one of the companies which is directly sanctioned. But also, I think when the 19th package was announced by the European Union, 3 more Indian firms have been put on that list. So, of course, these firms are going to be a lot more measured on what they do next. And I think for India, for now, because these countries, European Union and the United States, matter to us as economies, it'll be important for us to see whether unilateral or not, it'll be important for these businesses to comply.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to adjust and adapt to the changing environment, if not succumb. And that's where I guess there's room for negotiation with these partners also. Akshay, you already mentioned the tariffs, and the trade war seems to be like the defining feature of our times, clouding a lot of outlooks, but nonetheless, it's there and we have to grapple with it. But it's not only tariffs, right? But there are also export controls. The Chinese are resorting to export controls on rare earths and minerals and magnets. That has almost held the entire manufacturing base of the world to ransom. And then there are many other unfair trade practices that are going around and continue to roil the markets. So the question really is, in this kind of environment where we are already factoring in trade war, what is the recourse for countries? I mean, obviously, we're trying to negotiate with the US, for example, and we are also trying to do our own separate preferential trade agreements with the Europeans and with many other countries, and also trying to diversify the trade basket. There's a focus on self-reliance also, to try and rely more on domestic consumption and production. At the end of the day, this kind of global economic war does impact the economies, right, of most rising powers like India. So your thoughts on, this whole trade war phenomenon, what's going on, and how India can, continue to thrive and prosper, in this kind of rather difficult environment.
Again, here I'd say that there are 2 or 3 perhaps trend lines that we should take note of. One, trade itself and the negotiations on trade, the way we approach trade negotiations, what we hope to get out of them has changed. It used to be the case decades ago that we only focused on goods. Then, of course, we started to add other chapters related to environment, labor, e-commerce, digital, and so on. So it became more of an economic partnership. Now, if you look at any trade negotiations, particularly done by the United States, but I think others too, investment has become a key feature, particularly for the United States. $600 billion investment promised from the European Union to the United States, $300 billion from $50 billion by Japan, and so on. Even with the agreement that has been reached with Malaysia, that the United States has reached with Malaysia, has a $70 billion investment promised by Malaysia into the United States. So investments of this kind were never a feature, but they become a very important feature now of trade negotiations. Similarly, securing supply chains was never a feature, but it's become a very important feature of trade negotiations. As far as India is concerned, we do need some large, even some medium enterprises, public or private, that can really compete in the world. So, for instance, we started Khanij Videsh Limited, and what happened is, for us, it's a state-owned enterprise. It's a joint venture by 3 public sector enterprises. But then this enterprise that the government of India has set up is for critical minerals and has now already initiating agreements with Chile, with Argentina, with Bolivia. Of course, ONGC Videsh has done a great job over the years in securing oil and energy assets abroad. I think it's in 30 plus countries with billion-dollar balance sheet. But we need equally for some of our private enterprises now to come up and take a stake, have a footprint around the world. Sreeram, India has about $1 trillion worth of assets abroad, out of which $700 billion are foreign exchange reserves. But then that leaves about $300 to $350 billion of assets that India owns abroad, out of which about $180 billion is direct equity stake in enterprises or in assets abroad. So India is also trying now to secure its own assets for commercial or for resource needs. This is important for us to know. By the way, just to put it in perspective, if you look at, say, Germany, or if you look at Japan, which are the largest creditor nations in the world, they have more than $3.5 trillion to $4 trillion worth of assets around the world. By the way, it's not even China. People tend to think that China has the largest. China is at number 3. Japan and Germany tend to hold the most number of assets abroad. Similarly, when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment, I know you're talking about trade, but it's intricately linked to investments. The United States remains as the largest source and destination of foreign direct investment. So for us, we also need to participate in ensuring that we can get a piece of that pie.
Right.
And when it comes to really competing in a world where tariff measures have become so incisive and sometimes undisfavorable, the only approach India can take is to create enterprises and establish links so that we can secure our interests abroad, either through public or through private means.
Right. So, investment strategy is intrinsically linked to this, and therefore going out and acquiring assets is going to be critical, and probably they will also figure in a lot of these trade agreements with countries. Akshay, I mean, when we talk about economic war, obviously the question of currencies cannot be left out. And here, for a long time, there's been a lot of agonizing about the dollar hegemony or the dollar dominance in the global financial architecture. And many countries have been saying that we need to, reduce dependence on the dollar, and we need to trade in our own currencies, or we need to find alternative mechanisms to shield ourselves from the decisions of the US Federal Reserve, for example. If they change their interest rate, then it looks like the whole world is running around trying to adjust to that, and often the terms are unfavorable. So developing countries and a rising one like India, obviously the rupee is itself not yet, globalized in any way, although we have ambitions. So, and we have our reserves, like you said, in dollar and also in other currencies. And we do trade primarily in dollar worldwide, but we're also looking for other kind of payment mechanisms. So your thoughts on this aspect of this economic war, because many people believe that, de-dollarization is a worthy goal, that we should pursue de-dollarization. And President Trump has been attacking BRICS, for example, saying that they are out to de-dollarize and will not allow it to happen. So although India has not gone along with that. So your thoughts on this whole, dollar hegemony business, and what we can do to protect Indian interests in this kind of scenario where we seem to be at the mercy of the decisions of others.
See, dollar remains the global currency. And there are 3 things that determine what a global currency can be: as a unit, as a store of value, as a unit of a denomination, and as a mode of payment. As of today, dollar has about 60% of the world's foreign exchange is in dollars. 85% of the payments are made in dollars, and more than 95% of the global financial transactions are denominated in dollars. So dollar supremacy remains. It is true that today, more than 60% of the world's foreign exchange reserves are in dollars. It used to be 75% or 80% at one point. It has reduced somewhat. Other countries have moved towards gold. It is a misnomer that renminbi has taken dollar's place. Renminbi is rising. China is, of course, trying to internationalize the renminbi. But where dollar is used in 85% of the payment transactions, renminbi is used in maybe about 3% or 4%. And so we're not there yet. There are many other currencies that are in the making: the Australian dollar, the Canadian dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, all of which are being used. Of course, the Chinese would want to promote the renminbi. China itself uses renminbi more than it uses the dollars in its own global transaction. That's, of course, you can imagine that would be normal and expected. For India, we have not only our foreign exchange reserves, but our external debt is also denominated in dollars. So about 50 to 60% of our debt is in dollars. So of course, we need dollars to service debt. Our businesses need dollars to actually purchase inputs from abroad. We've also needed dollars in times of crisis where we've had to ink swap deals. So India holds about $200 to $250 billion worth of foreign exchange in dollars out of the 700 billion. The rest is in gold and IMF, SDR, and so on. So dollar will remain as a global currency in the near term, in the medium term as well. And for us, we need to figure out a way in which we can continue to comply with dollars and hold it for safety. That does not take away from the fact that India needs channels to ensure that its payments are made smoothly to our partners. So for instance, under BRICS, you mentioned BRICS currency is a far-fetched idea, but the BRICS Payments Task Force has had some thinking on how to make payments or maybe how to settle some of the trade in local currency so that it's not all of it has to be routed through dollars. That I think is a worthy and noble effort, and we made some progress there.
Right. So, yeah, it's a long way to go, but there are means and ways by which we can secure our financial future beyond the dollar. But of course, the dollar will remain a mainstay, and that's we have to accept the reality and work with it. Akshay, I want to also talk a little bit about technology and the tech war, because that's also very much part of the global economic competition and conflict that we are seeing. I mean, US-China rivalry over advanced technology, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, it's quite obvious. And the US is imposing export controls to try and deny China access to advanced know-how. But the Chinese are pumping in hundreds of billions of dollars, worth of resources into advancing their own domestic capabilities in these fields. So, the question is, when there is this big tug of war between the number one and number two economies on technology, what are the potential opportunities that rising powers like India can have in this scenario? Because India would be great power, it has the potential to be equal of China and the US. We are not yet there. So technology is going to be very crucial to power our rise, right? So what do we do in this tech war scenario to try and maximize the gains for India, and how do we check against any downsides in this tech war?
I think even, of course, I've always maintained, Sreeram, that India needs capital and it needs technology. And while we are developing ours domestically, we should be unabashedly open to taking as much capital as we should from the world for our own growth and our own economic development, and doing as many technology partnerships with anyone in the world, so that it helps our economic development and our growth. I want to put a couple of things into perspective. Just like trade and finance are connected, technology and finance are also connected, because some of it comes with technology, also comes with partnerships. It comes with joint ventures. Reserve Bank of India had put out a paper a few years ago showing that the United States, Japan, and Germany are India's top technology partners when it comes to our businesses doing joint ventures, for instance, right? Japan, of course, is the largest creditor. We've had a long relationship in seeking Japanese technology and Japanese finance. Perhaps a new country that can also be considered is South Korea. South Korea has just done 2 successful IPOs in the country today. LG has sold off 15% of its stake in India for $1.3 billion. And Hyundai has sold off 17.5% for $3.3 billion. So that means South Korean companies are actually raising funds in India. Now the question is, can all the money that South Korean companies have raised, can we entice them and motivate them to plow it back in India? Right. But that's just a case study. I don't mean to pick on just these two. The idea is that South Korea is actually amongst the top 10 foreign direct investors in the world, a source of foreign direct investment. So if South Korea is one of the largest sources of foreign direct investment in the world, that could be a very, very good country to seek out. And another one, perhaps in my mind, the most underdeveloped compared to the aspiration, is the European Union. Survey after survey, and there's been a latest survey by Federation of European Business in India as well, that European business in India are ready to plow in more investments once the FTA is done.
That's something to look forward to.
That's really something that
Japan, South Korea, European Union, and of course the US. I mean, end of the day, Google investing $15 billion in AI hub in Vishakhapatnam. These things are also stellar, and we have to continue to.
Look, the United States is perhaps also misunderstood. It's the largest economy in the world. We have New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, which are at 30 plus trillion, whereas India is 5 trillion. So it's a very big economy. And 40% of our capital markets are assets under custody by the American investors, institutional investors. So we really need to respect what the United States brings.
Absolutely. It was a very, very comprehensive discussion on global economic warfare, but also cooperation inside the rubric of war. There can also be cooperation and partnerships. And this is one of the main takeaways for me from this discussion with Akshay Mathur, because end of the day, we are not at war with everybody. It's not a war of all against all. There are certain points of conflict and fault lines, but there are also points of convergence, and India will have to maximize those. India will also need to do major things in terms of its own structural approach to international finance and investment and trade going forward, because that is the way we can not only shield ourselves from this global economic war, but also come out stronger. Let me thank Akshay Mathur for doing the geopolitical puzzle and unpacking it for our audiences. So thank you so much for joining.
You're very welcome.
Global economic war, viewers, is not pretty, and you need to have a strong heart and a strong mind, and you need to strategize how to survive and thrive in this nasty and brutish world that is out there. So India is doing that, and we need your support and your involvement in that as well, and your consideration for all these complex factors that go into making a national strategy on global economic issues. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.